And I'll send this on. Katrina's group. Oh, there's Kelly. Yay. Hi, Kelly.
Hello, everyone.
Good to see you. Good to see everyone. Yeah, so I was just saying that Katrina's group, I think, is meeting on the 13th. So they'll discuss kind of this as well. But I thought maybe we could just very briefly do a go around in terms of the learn-in March. We haven't had a chance to talk since. And if there's any follow-up folks wanted to bring up or any thoughts or takeaways from that would be fabulous. Thank you all for all your work on it. It was huge, and the feedback I've heard has been very, very positive. So very appreciative of that. But yeah, why don't we just do a quick go around? Dennis, is there anything that you want to share or comment on from the learn-in March?
Oh, I enjoyed it. I really do. I love the interaction and the excitement of people. And clearly, climate change and ecological stewardship is really something that we have to respond and think about in our academic and artistic work. That's what I've picked up. And there are like warriors, people like these people are ready to engage and to innovate. And thanks to Kelly also for a wonderful collaboration with the session.
Excellent. Yeah, it's funny because I wish I could have been in all the breakout rooms. I was so eager to hear what was happening everywhere. Yeah. Yeah. Selena, is there anything you want
to? I think the main things are I just really appreciated the Ian and Tanya's presentations. Like they just had a lot to say. It was really great to give them the platform and have that many people present who, if they weren't aware already of all of this work that was going on, this was a really great opportunity to share the depth of knowledge that's being created. I can't remember the third presenter, her name, but Ian and Tanya really
Julia, yeah.
As just awesome. And yeah, I feel like Stefano and I we made good use of the time that we had with the small group we had. There's a resource that's sort of like the beginning development of something that I feel like I'll return to and use. And I hope the people who came to our session could as well. That's about all.
Thank you. Yeah,
felt like for a 3-hour Zoom session on a Saturday, it felt worth it.
Yeah, I found it went by really fast, at least in our breakout room too. Yeah. Stefano, anything you want to?
Yeah, I agree with Selena. The speakers were great. Tanya was sort of mind-blowing in many ways, and Ian's talk was great too. I enjoyed the journey. I thought it was very meaningful for me to actually engage with the larger discussion of how to plan a theater history syllabus around the notion of criticism. And in the process of finding those connections, I actually think that I have a pathway to actually implement it the next time that I teach my Drama 208. I think objectively, since we did want to proceed as a workshop as opposed to a top-down sort of demonstration, we would have benefited from having at least double the time so that we wouldn't feel the pressure to move and cover so many things and slides but I was very happy with the results that we got given the sort of circumstances that we were operating under, and I think the people who attended thought it was useful in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, Kelly, is there anything you want to say about it?
I had such an amazing time. I felt re-enlivened from the whole thing. Monday morning was like working with a colleague, planning an event for our department. I felt so activated by both the speakers and our room. So I feel like, at the very least it's working on us. And I loved the concept that came through in the opening about ecoscenography basically is like the Trojan horse of like getting people into the conversation. That's really been inspiring to me, and like how I think I'm going to think about the work more explicitly moving forward. And our breakout room was very small. Like there was just me, Dennis, and one person. But we still had a conversation that like we got cut off because of time, right? We could have kept talking. So I definitely wish I could have been in every room. But our room was beautiful and valuable. And we have like collated all the notes everyone did from all the different rooms. So like I've been going through those, and that's been really fascinating too.
Thank you. Yeah. Hey, Taylor. We're just going around if anyone wants to, share any kind of reflections on the learning. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Sure. Can you hear me? I've been having some trouble with my mic. Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I found it really valuable. I, like everybody else, really enjoyed those first sort of introductory sessions, and I think the folks that were in my breakout room really got a lot out of those sessions for sure. And I had a lot of fun in that breakout room. Mine was a little bit more prompt based and doing a bit of creative work, and then leading into talking about pedagogy a bit more explicitly. And so I think that structure really worked well with the group I had. I'm still, I've had emails back and forth from the folks that were in the group still. So yeah, I found it really rewarding, and it was fun to sort of set up and facilitate for sure.
Thank you. Excellent. Yeah. And Kim.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I got to drop into a couple of the rooms, so I was the lucky one, but I also really felt the desire to stay. So yeah, I think the workshop dynamic felt really generative, kind of regardless of the size. And there's definitely the feedback, I think about like roughly half the people who signed up attended, or maybe 60% or something. But we've had follow-up from a lot of those people saying like how important, this work was, and, they were really sorry to miss it, and really like very much desiring and a little bit desperate for resources to support it. So for me, it helped to, I feel very like in the know in this field in a way. And so it was really helpful to hear from others how much desire and need there is for workshops like this, and for the redistribution of resources. And I've been, trying also to invite those people into our group, and like that feels to me like one of the things I want to keep thinking through is how do we keep allowing the working group to expand, as opposed to saying, we're the experts now in this field, as opposed to say, well, no, wherever you're at on that journey, you're welcome to be part of it. And of course, there's just like the labor and time issue for a lot of folks, I think. But yeah, I've heard from different people who are like leading task forces and whatever in their departments around ecological issues. And I'm like, well, come, like we can support that journey. So I'm hoping that in all of these follow-up communications that we have, that we can also try to keep holding people into this space.
Yeah. That's
Kim,
great.
Kim, you just made me think a bit about the structure. Like we're working within the structure of a working group in CATR, but I also know that you work a lot with the Artists Brigade and the structure of the concept of a brigade.
Yeah.
I wonder if that might be like a helpful thing to bring into this, right? But
arguably, we have not really animated the brigade
okay.
idea in the Artist Brigade either, but I think that's right. Like, I think that there's a way that the terms of these kind of academic spaces don't necessarily serve us. And I think our group is continually pushing against some of those kinds of patterns that have typically get developed in CATR, and it takes a bit to reestablish expectations.
It's a military metaphor, but
yeah.
I don't know.
But I think that the core idea is like, I think from folks I've talked to, there's a bit of a perception about like the working group is formed already. And I think we just want to keep emphasizing, no, anyone can join us, anyone can be involved, it's an open kind of thing, because the more of us working on this, the better. Absolutely. Yeah. And so just to update everyone, I know Kelly has been looking at the things that came out of there, and we've communicated a little bit with Taylor, who I think we're still waiting for kind of CATR approval to just add all of the resources from that Learn In and elsewhere to as a website page through CATR. Is that correct, Taylor?
No, we don't need approval. I
Okay.
can just put them up, but I was just bringing people in to see if they had thoughts on format or structure.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I think I was just like, do we need them to say yes first? So yeah, that's in the works, just so that we have kind of a landing page with all of the resources that we can send people to. It's amazing. So yeah, thank you both for working on that, and we'll share a link whenever it's ready. Just let us know, Kelly, if you need anything as you move forward with it. Yeah. Perfect.
No, I just need some time. I just want to like make there be like a single thing that has all the resources from like every single sort of document that came out. So I just need the time to go through it all, but then it will be up.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Yeah. Any other thoughts or comments on that before we move into what we're doing next?
I just put synonyms for brigade. Just
I
'cause
love that.
I said on it. Sorry. I was listening to.
No, that's great, because you're right. I never thought of it, but brigade is a very military term.
I like party. We're the ecological, like, I mean, that starts to become like a political party, but I mean like a dance party.
Most of my service work in my department is like throwing parties and celebrating like births and things. So, you know, I'm all for the party.
Excellent. All right, we'll move into the plenary, if that's good for folks then. So as I mentioned in the email, and we haven't yet heard back from the conference committee in terms of the schedule, but there's just been some back and forth, because they said, yes, you can do the plenary. And then they kind of came back and said, our scheduling's getting really tight for Halifax. So, you know, then it was like, do you want to be online? Do you still want it to be in person? Do you want to just, you know, have like we've done in the past, where all the working groups will have something at the same time? And so we looped Katrina in as well for our partnership with the course correction working group. And we just kind of said, I think from our perspective, the thing we definitely do not want is for all the working groups to meet at the same time again, because that was our feedback last year. And ideally, our goal in having a plenary was that everyone would be attending. And so we're not just preaching to the converted who, you know, have interest in this working group, but there's an opportunity to share what's happening with the whole of CATR. So ideally, not competing with several sessions was why we wanted to do a plenary. And so where it's been left right now is Roberta is trying to figure out if they can give us a time in Halifax, which would be in person, but also hybrid. And if not, then the second choice is to give us a plenary without anything competing, but online during the online time pre-Halifax, I think is where that works out. And so she emailed yesterday just saying, we're still working on it. So I told her we were meeting today, and Katrina's group is meeting this week as well. So yeah, I think, is that, Kim, an accurate update?
Yeah, I think so. And it's been really helpful to hear from folks about plans to go to Halifax or not. I think Selena, Dennis, Stefano, and myself are not planning to go to Halifax. I think Hope is planning to go. It'd be Kelly, Taylor, what are your thoughts at this time?
If we have an in-person event in Halifax, I will be in Halifax. If we don't, then I don't know if I can like justify going. But I would be really enthused for us to have an in-person thing and to show up. So.
I'm going to be there. I'll be in Halifax. So if it's there, great. If we're doing it online, that's okay too. I'm game for whatever.
Excellent. That's good to know. Yeah. And I know, Kelly, and probably others too, like if you're not actively doing something, sometimes you can't get the travel funding as well, right? So that's a piece of the puzzle for sure too. Yeah, so I guess, I mean, I literally just before this meeting was kind of, I always do the like, okay, now they said, when someone says yes, it's like, what did I write in that proposal, right? So just going back to what we had originally discussed. And I think that's where you know, the in-person or not is a huge thing, because our initial kind of conversations when we decided to pitch the plenary really talked about working with Nova Scotia-based guest groups and, you know, connecting it to the location, and making sure that it was something that was very active. And we talked about performative component, showing an ideal or potential future, possibly working with local student groups, or, you know, something that would lead up to a manifesto was our kind of August discussion. And then in the proposal that we submitted, we talked a lot about this being an opportunity to disseminate our research that we've done to date as a working group, as well as Katrina's course correction working group, and then support curricular adjustments. So with this kind of eye to sharing the language, which Kim beautifully wrote, sharing irresistible practices to seed transformation, and how to make transitions in training programs. And so something that's very practice-based, I think, is what we were kind of emphasizing, as opposed to just a lot of talk. So just to share that those were kind of what we discussed in August, and then what we put in the proposal. Kim, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think also just that felt really rooted in the workshop that Dennis led for us in Lethbridge, and then the kind of follow-up conversation around thinking about what are some of the other kinds of performance traditions and practices that model like the kinds of teaching and learning and practice that would like renovate curriculum and way, or even just like teaching practices, so that it models these kind of more ecologically grounded and sustainable practices. So I feel like there's also that lineage very much from our time together and from that like embodied workshop that Dennis offered.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, so I think today's really just about kind of brainstorming and getting some ideas going, so we can look at next steps. And also then, like I said, the next step would be Katrina's meeting with her group on the 13th, and then just cross-referencing what both the groups are talking about and bringing us all together. So yeah, any initial kind of thoughts, responses, ideas? Are we, I guess in person is easy, and like, you know, knowing I and Kelly and Taylor could be there if it was in person, you know, I still personally feel like connecting with groups there and the practices there would be important. Is that still something we feel can be done some way if we end up online? Or, you know, are we really talking about, once we know the delivery method, there might be two very different versions of this plenary? Any thoughts about that?
I guess my first question, imagining just to start with the in-person stuff, is like, what are people's connections in Halifax? Like, do we have groups that we have relationships with based on the people who are in this room? Because I have relationships with like artists in Halifax, but not theater artists, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I certainly playwrights through the Playwrights Guild. Catherine Banks is there, who I've worked with a lot in the past, and she's kind of a pillar in the playwriting community, and has even hosted in her place just outside Halifax in Sambro. She hosts female playwrights just to come and workshop, and so that's, you know, someone who I think would be a good person to connect with, because she knows everyone in the community. Yeah.
I know there's a performance artist and scholar named Leah Decter. Do other people know Leah? So Leah is in Halifax. She's at the art and design. What's it called there? And she says she'll be at CATR. And Leah's work is, even though she's not in our working group, is like deeply connected to this, and she would be. I'm not volunteering her, but somebody I would just think it would make so much sense to connect with her and the work that she does. I mean, she's also based in Winnipeg, actually. Like she's worked there for years, right? And got this job in Halifax. So I'll put her info in the bio, in the chat.
That would be great. Thank you, Selena. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I'm thinking about is also we used all of our funds for the other event, so I don't think we have funds generated at present to offer. So we could, that would just be one thing to flag and think about. Because typically plenaries would be compensated in some way, but yeah, maybe we could think creatively about that. But I think Dennis and I have previously been in conversation with Sheila Christie, who's at Cape Breton University and has a deep interest in ecological practice and education. And her partner also is a practicing artist and does quite a bit of activism around XR's theatrical forms in the area. So as far as like building relationships, they would be other people, though they're often quite busy. I think I probably sent info about our group at some time to them, but if they're in the area, like they might be interested.
Mhm. Yeah, anyone else have connections in that region? No? I'm aware, I know Catherine teaches playwriting and it'd be great to work with some of her students possibly. I'm also aware that the time frame is very tight now in terms of like doing something performative. It feels like, you know, being 2 months away essentially. That could be challenging for sure. Yeah.
I'm wondering if we could think a little more creatively, as I think we've been, generating of like instead of us delivering, of instead like facilitating something that's a little more interactive and that kind of like prompt based so that people go on their own kind of like thought journeys and exploration, as opposed to us being like, here is what we have to show. So just wondering if instead we could kind of approach it in that format. Also because if we're feeling like, we've just had the whole, we've had our own kind of opportunity with the teach-in to like assemble experts in the field. So instead, if this is like more interactive, even if it's like, if it's in person, if it's talk to your neighbors and do this exercise around X or whatever for this 10 minutes of kind of flipping that space, that would be a different kind of approach.
I love that idea, Kim.
Yeah.
It would emphasize the urgency for action and like just to get like wherever you are, start working. And here's like, we'll provide resources, we'll like support connections and just get that going.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about like the end of the teach-in where like the last question was, what do you need for support to move forward? And then if in the initial pitch, we're talking about a manifesto, maybe to have like part of it be sort of like a speculative utopian conversation about like, what does your department or practice or whatever sort of locale you want to think about look like in 10 years if it's been ecologized? And then like, and if that's sort of the speculative part, and then in the concrete part, sort of like, what are the next 5 steps that you need to like get to the 10-year vision? That seems to me like kind of an extension of like the types of conversations we were having at the teach-in.
Yeah, that's great, Kelly. Thanks. Yeah. Other thoughts? I know you said, Taylor, that your breakout was very prompt based. Were there particular prompts that were really effective or something that you think might translate?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the types of workshops that I've been doing in this vein lately, I'm realizing really connect to ideas of ecological preservation and nostalgia. So sort of connecting self and home with these ideas and sort of prompting people to think about ways in which that those connections are made. And yeah, I think nostalgia is really powerful and an interesting sort of in for a lot of people. when it comes to this topic. So I'd be interested in, doing something related to that again. Again, very, dependent on what everybody's doing, how we're structuring this, but I'm all for, doing some sort of creative type workshop and then letting that lead into a more practical conversation if that's where we need to go.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
So in terms of like the utopian imaginary parts that Kelly was just talking about, it made me think of Una Chadari's and the rest of the group, their work on the letters to the future. And that kind of creative and playful way of bringing kind of imagination to this work. That's been so wonderful. And maybe that there certainly are a lot of resources in that website that I put in. And we could possibly build on something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Other?
I wonder if also what we could do some thinking around is like, as what's our pulse on like what people think about in terms of ecological stewardship, and then how could we dial that up the notch like a couple degrees and or help to forge across connections to think about it across other kinds of like movements in terms of advancing pedagogical initiatives, be that racism, indigenization, decolonization. So of there being, yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's something quite generative around this, like turning it back around and then just offering like guided directions to try to help advance something, and that could be really dynamic in that space and like so much more fun to show up to.
Yeah, that's great.
I don't know if this is helpful, but in the teach-in, I started with, a meditation. And so just kind of starting with being inward and kind of imagining things and really opening up the space for it to become something very different, maybe than a more, what, people would expect of that kind of work.
I'm also struck by the like Kelly, your debrief from our learning, that you talked about feeling so energized and activated, and that you return to your work like filled with ideas, and that seems like that would be my goal for the plenary, is that we for however we do it, like that the people who attend come out with that kind of just energy to get to work and do, and be excited about it. And it's funny, like I don't know if Manifesto does that, quite honestly. Like Manifesto has, they certainly have a purpose, but I don't know if that's the energy that ends up coming out of it. I could be wrong. I don't know.
No, well, I think we've probably all been part of strategic planning processes that didn't lead to any action, just led to another document, right? So yeah, I think that's a good point. But I love that. Would folks agree that our goal is to, at the end of whatever it is we do, people feeling energized to get to work and activated and inspired, hopefully? Yeah. And just thinking of your meditation, I love that, Taylor. And it reminds me, I think, of why, just that brief start that Dennis gave us all in Lethbridge. It was just, again, because it was embodied, it got us out of our heads, it let us think about that. And in my breakout session, there was so much conversation in acting classes about taking people outdoors and doing class outside and in relation to the land. And so that makes me think about that too. Yeah, Dennis, is there anything you want to add? I noticed you unmuted.
Yeah, I think that do you think it would be beneficial if we also identify some impediments that we are confronting when we think about, innovating something? I guess in the very beginning, there could be a space of really confronting, things that stops us to go forward, and what are the forces that delimits our energy to make an impact. And then we go to a more activating conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that ties into what Kelly said earlier about the, what do you need? What supports do you need? What help do you need to move this forward? That, there's probably barriers or impediments that people are facing that we might want to address. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that that's always an interesting part of a conversation. And I think we'll want to think through flow of like, how do we open up a space of creativity and imaginative kind of space? And then also we could do that, I would imagine that possibly coming a little bit later, but of also being helpful for us then in springing into the third year of a work where we said, or one of our goals at one time, which I think is always up for, renovation, is that we would create, some kind of other resource that would be helpful to disseminate as a kind of plan or for faculties. But I do think that it can also be helpful to hear what those barriers are, but of also being thoughtful about when in the process we like invite that, because it shuts down other kinds of thinking. Kind of in between a couple of these things, I was thinking about Joanna Macy's like spiral with the work that reconnects, and I've used it in some workshops, and then there's sort of like 4 different phases to it, and they're like prompt-based invitations that then you kind of speak to a partner or speak aloud or write, and that this cycle like ends with quite actionable kinds of things to do. And so just feeling like there's definitely like movement that we can think through of where do we want this journey to lead to, and what is most energizing? Is it something very aspirational, or is what's really valuable having time to talk through challenges folks are having, either in the imagining phase or in the like implementation phase?
Mhm.
Kim, can you put that Joanna Macy's spiral work in the chat? You know that?
That's great. Yeah.
I'm also wondering, like, how open do we think this is? Again, imagining in person, although we can imagine in camera too, but like, how open are they going to be to like doing a water dance, or doing like, I'm even imagining like, doing a clown exercise. I am someone who's always going to be like, yeah, let's go outside, let's move our bodies for like, and like give at least the first 20 minutes to that before we even talk about anything. But do we feel like meditation is more of the energy? Like, are people going to be more cerebral, or do we think this is an opportunity to body? Because like in terms of enlivening, to me, I'm like, get everyone silly and doing a little bit of a clown something. To me, that's the spark that I often need. But
Yeah, that's a good thing to consider, like who our audience is, basically, right? Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, Stefano, I saw you nodding a little during that.
I was nodding no, because clowns are my worst nightmare. That was just so you would have lost me there. No, I'm thinking, I guess I'm struggling to visualize it. I'm totally seeing the benefits of energizing whoever is there, the audience, ourselves, but energize them to have a discussion, energize them to change what. So in terms of goals and objectives, what it is that we want to accomplish, that to me would be an important question to address. And then to respond to Kelly, I think that you might get people who are totally on board with physical, gestural, embodied type of exercise. and others that would need a different type of approaches. So plan around diversifying the ways in which we might deal with the audience, because I guess we all like to be silly, but some of us get there in different ways, right? So different processes. But basically, to me, in order to sort of start wrapping my head around it, I would need to get a little bit more clear as to what we want to accomplish, besides creating a feeling of well-being and energizing to move, but to move where, toward what, with what objectives, specifically to engage in what sort of discourses, to address what type of eco-critical approaches, because they're so varied, right?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks. Yeah, any responses in terms of what people feel the goal? Like, I think like we put a proposal in that was very broad. So I think there's lots of room for us to decide like what are the outcomes that we want specifically. If I think, yes, to energize people, inspire them, but to do what, to what end, and what focus is a really great question. Any thoughts or responses?
I always think of a course syllabus, right? I'm thinking, what does that look like? Because we have a course syllabus that we inherit, and then we put our own spin on it. But a course syllabus that's really intended for a consciousness towards stewardship and sustainability within artistic practice. What does that look like? How do we language that? And yeah, I as a new faculty member, I think that would be most inspirational for me, because I would like to make change and I would like to contribute. Yeah, and what kind of language do I need to acquire to be able to make my department believe that this is relevant, not just in the global conversation, but within our department?
I'm also just remembering, and maybe this would be helpful to narrow the goals, is that this is a proposed co-organized plenary session with the course correction group, which I just looked up there. That's their write-up. It's about theater in space and reorienting approaches. And so I wonder if that's, I don't know whether that would help us think through. I guess Katrina will be watching this. Hi, Katrina, in the future. And that, there's so much in the group that they're working on that's seems more theoretical than what we're doing, but also seems incredibly relevant and powerful. So I just would like to weave that into our goals, if possible, or see how our goals could complement what they're doing, whatever that will be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, obviously our brainstorm today is just a starting point, because then we will have to kind of, hear what their aspirations are. Yeah. Kelly, was that a hand you wanted?
Yeah, I'm thinking about what Kim was saying earlier about like turning it up a notch, and maybe like how that involves thinking like sort of how is environmental stewardship in coalition with other projects. So there's a question to me about like rather than maybe like dictating the group that a goal for like the whole group, the whole audience is like turning in one direction, creating the opportunity to sort of say, okay, I'm just going to use the orientation language since Selena has given it to us, but like saying, okay, how are you already trying to pivot, whether it's like your department, your relationship with your students, your relationship with CATR as sort of like three, or your practice, but how are you already trying to reorient? And then what does it mean to think about that reorientation as an ecological move? so then rather than maybe starting with like environmental justice and then how is environmental justice, all of these other projects, what are the other projects you're interested in, and then how is that an ecological project? That might be useful for folks, especially if they're like people who haven't come to our teach-in.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea to sit with, and I think there's definitely some seeds there that could be really generative. The other thing that I'm thinking about, maybe also connected to just different approaches I take in this work, is around like deepening an understanding of like what my personal sense of responsibility is, given my positionality on land and in this moment of climate history. And so it's not, it's that like ongoing inquiry and then a kind of articulation of that like I can find helpful when I'm sitting down to think about how am I going to teach this differently? Like, what do I want to deepen? What are different kind of approaches, pedagogical approaches I could bring? And or what decision am I making decisions that are in alignment with my values on the basis of my understanding of my responsibilities in this place and this time? And so I wonder if like part of what would be generative is breaking, I don't know, creating some space and exploration around the idea of stewardship and how that connects to what we already feel most rooted in our sense of responsibilities. And then of making this as a time to try to do some of that partly internal work or also like dialogue with others to, as a kind of profession, like as a kind of workshop space. Again, this feels kind of workshop-y, and that can then, seed different changes in the longer term.
Mhm.
I really like that, Kim. Just put that in there. I think that would be really a lovely way to sort of approach this. And that it's more of a personal development rather than a top-down sort of, this is what you should get out of this. I was also thinking that it might be kind of nice to take this idea of collecting the resources and putting them together a little bit further, right? What can we actually do with them that's useful and practical to people? Thinking of Dennis's syllabus and then thinking of those other bits and pieces, is there a way that we can sort of creatively engage and put them together and make them accessible to people a bit more widely? If that's through the CATR website, that's great, but I think that might be just a sort of stopgap for now. Maybe there's opportunity for that to exist in a different place in a more fulsome way.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Taylor. And yeah, I'm also really resonating with this instead of us coming in and saying, here's what you should get out of this, or here's what, we're going to give you, that it's, more generative from who's joining us, and something really interesting about that for sure. Yeah, Kelly.
Could we envision a way of doing this as kind of like a story circles model where, if people are in the hybrid version, then the folks who are online can lead breakout rooms, and those of us who are in person can break off with the physical attendees. But I'm curious what people think about in terms of like vulnerability and asking people to share. But I know like when I've done sort of the applied climate work, doing story circles about like, what is your connection to water, or like what is your connection to like the place you live now, like what is your family connection, like all these types of self-reflections that could be personal, right? Like we could give people basically writing prompts, but it might be really interesting to have people share them communally.
Yeah, I really like what Stefano said too, of just thinking about diversifying, like giving options to people, right? Knowing that we may have some folks who feel less comfortable sharing, who feel like this whole approach is going to be like different for some coming to a conference. So I love that, Kelly, and I think perhaps there's options for people, right? Yeah. Kim?
I'm remembering now one of the workshops, work that reconnects workshops I did, where there was breakout rooms online, and there were strangers, so there were these kind of prompts. I think it was stream of conscious sharing, but I also wrote myself a lot of notes, so there might have been a time to write to yourself and then to do that, or we can make decisions either way. But then there was also a particular position that some of the listeners had. So one was as a young child, one was as a tree, one was as a peer or something, right? So of thinking about like, if that's another dimension that feels generative or not, for sharing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I'm aware that we have about 12 minutes left in this meeting, and maybe need to think a little bit about next steps and also capacity, like, because this is all coming up quite quickly and at end of time or end of semester. So yeah, maybe we could, I mean, this conversation feels much more like I can breathe into it in a different way than the idea of like, oh, I need to like help co-write something that is very expert, to share in a plenary space. So I do appreciate like that kind of reframing that's happened. Feels easier to step into.
Yeah, I guess what I'm hearing is we're thinking about something that's more like our role is more facilitation of a process than it is to prepare anything to present. It's kind of the vibe I'm getting. So I would suggest, like, in terms of next steps, that similar to what we did with the learning, like maybe it's creating a like who is able to take on what in terms of tasks and involvement, and kind of starting that going, so that, yes, I agree with you, Kim, in terms of capacity, like the more we spread out the work, I think the easier it is for everyone. And then also thinking timeline, knowing that if Katrina meets with her group later this week, that we'll want to hear what they've had to say, and then probably find a time to jointly start planning. Hopefully hearing our delivery model and when this is going to happen soon, because that will also allow us to kind of plan more specifically. But I'm loving all these ideas. I think it's incredible. Like just the options and the possibilities is truly incredible. Does that, like, in terms of next steps, like creating a similar kind of, Google list of tasks that people can kind of sign up for or offer how they feel they can be involved or participate, and then also thinking through timeline. Yeah, Kelly.
When you say sort of dividing the work, is it preparatory work, or is it sort of saying during the event, I am prepared to facilitate the following forms of like exercises? And they might be things that we discussed now, or there might be things people come up with later.
I think it's both. Like, and people would sign up for whatever they feel they're able to do, because there will be some preparatory work. I'm sure they will want a description of this thing for the, conference information. So someone's gonna have to draft that. I'm sure that there will be some coordination requirements. So I think if we do a list of like the preparatory work, but then also the actual facilitation work, and everyone can kind of offer what they feel they can. And that'll give us a sense of, what is manageable.
Right. It does feel like there needs to be a core group who is like developing a kind of exercise, right? Like I feel like that's something, and that would probably be a subgroup of our larger group who can find a time that works for those folks.
I mean, one thing I could offer right now is I think I'd actually really like to go and talk with Katrina and the course correction group. Like, if possible, I'd like to go to their meeting, which might be able to speed up the communication between our groups. And Katrina's acting as a bridge from that group to ours, and I'd be happy to do that the other way. And that seems like we could have a vague plan, but I think until we actually know what it is that they'd like to do, we should maybe hold off on creating our spreadsheet with our task list. But I mean, I'll write to Katrina right now and find out when that meeting is, and if it's possible that I could join them.
That would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it sounds like really, I mean, the next step is to hear from that group, right? To know how we're working together and to get the information on whether it's online or in person and when. So that's kind of the real next things we need in order to then move on to creating something more logistical. Does that make sense for everyone? Yeah. So yeah, we can continue to nudge Roberta and the committee to try and get that response from them. But yeah, Selena, if you want to reach out to Katrina, that's fabulous. And I will upload this recording and send her a link of it right away so that she's also got this before going into that meeting, because that would be helpful. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't mind writing, blurbs for CATR if that is a helpful thing, or even a draft that can then just be adjusted. But that seems certainly something I can do. And I am really actually curious now about the facilitation, or not, maybe not the facilitation, but of like what kind of workshop. And like, I'd love that to be a collective, like a subgroup. Taylor, I don't want to sign you up for things, but I know you work in this like prompt and like exercises. So if it would be a way to also like bring in like different people's skills, like that would be really exciting.
Yes. Yeah, happy to. I will say this summer I do have 2 shows premiering, so I'm going to be a little bit busy in the next little while, but I am very committed to supporting in the best way that I can.
So Kim, if I'm hearing you right, like you're thinking there's like a subgroup who will be like the facilitation group, like the people who plan to actually actively be involved with the session itself.
I imagine with the session, there will be like some kind of frame that needs to get created, especially in relation to the 2 working groups. And that could also be the kind of thing that someone who isn't able to attend writes. Like I could potentially do that if I know what's happening, or, if that flows from Selena's collab or whatever, right? Like that's kind of the thing that I think people can, as one part of development, and then another part is actually thinking through what would the workshop consist of if it's kind of prompt based, and what kind of moves like do we want to make. And I think that like I also think that probably most of us would be able to facilitate in different forms. I think the development of that workshop is a different thing than facilitating it.
Excellent. Any other thoughts or questions or things we need to discuss right now? No. So as soon as we have more info, we'll share that. Yes, go ahead, Selena.
Yes, like just timeline wise, early next week we'll have some more information and can take the next step, whatever that will be. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the hope.
Yeah, because either way, if it's online, it's June 10th to. It's like it's all within like the mid-June, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're back to back. It's like the 10th, 11th, I think, or 8th, 9th, 10th or something. And then the following one is when it's in person. So
yeah, okay.
So, and the other thing I'm holding is like Stefano's idea of like actually articulating kind of goals and objectives, and that would be actually a good thing for us to keep thinking about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that will really require talking to the other group, right?
Yeah. And if we could do that by early next week, then the tasks would unfold from there, I think.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you all so much. Lots of amazing ideas. And I think, you know, today was really just about brainstorming to get the juices flowing and start thinking about this because yeah, we will have to kind of hit the ground running. So thank you for that. Yeah. And I will send everyone the link to the recording instead of doing minutes because that's quicker. All right. Thank
Alrighty.
you all.
Bye. Thanks, Dennis.